Working nights at St. Augustus Children's Hospital wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. My job was simple: clean the old, closed-off wing and make sure it stayed in decent shape. It hadn't seen a patient in years, not since the hospital opened the newer modern wing. The place was dark, the walls chipped, and it smelled faintly of antiseptic and damp wood. But the check cleared every week, so I kept my head down, did my work, and tried not to think about the eerie stories I'd heard from the few staff members who'd worked here back when this wing was still in use. That night, I was finishing up in room 13, the last on my checklist, when I heard something odd. The faint, high-pitched sound of a child's laughter drifted from somewhere down the hall. I froze, mop in hand, and strained to listen. For a moment, the only sound was my own breathing. Then I heard it again. A light giggle, the sound unmistakable. The hairs on my arms prickled, and I felt a chill seep into my bones. I told myself it was just the wind rattling through the cracked windows. But something in that laugh, it wasn't the sound of joy. It was sharp, twisted, echoing in a way that made my skin crawl. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself to shake it off. But then came another sound, faint footsteps pattering down the hall. Little footsteps like bare feet padding against the cold tile. I dropped my mop, the wooden handle clattering to the floor. The sound stopped, and then the footsteps began again. I followed the noise down the hall, each step carrying me closer to the sound. It led me to room 17, a room that was always locked, its door worn and heavy with a rusty sign that read isolation. I felt an odd, uncomfortable pull, like the air itself was urging me forward. I tried the handle, expecting it to be locked, but it swung open without a sound. I stepped inside, flicking on my flashlight. The room was empty, just a bare metal bed frame, a chair in the corner, and peeling paint on the walls. But then as I swept the flashlight across the walls, my heart nearly stopped. The walls were covered with drawings. Hundreds of crayon drawings, haphazardly covering every inch of the room, floor to ceiling. Each picture was childlike, a crude sketch with dark, spindly lines. But what unnerved me wasn't the drawings themselves, it was what they depicted. Every picture showed the same scene, a figure standing alone in a dark hallway, surrounded by small, blank-faced children. Each of their eyes stared forward, empty circles, almost hollow. But the figure in the middle, it was unmistakably me. My hair, my uniform, even my cleaning cart. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps. None of this had been here the night before. This room had been bare. How could these drawings just appear out of nowhere? Then from the corner of the room came another soft, sickeningly familiar sound. A child's laugh. I whipped around, shining my flashlight toward the source, but the room was empty. Or so I thought. Then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. One of the drawings near the door was different from the others. It showed the same figure, standing in the same hallway, but this time, the children were closer, and their blank faces had changed. They were smiling. A whisper brushed against my ear, so faint I could barely make it out. "Come play with us, Sarah." My heart pounded in my chest, each beat like a drum reverberating through my body. I spun around, looking for an exit, but the door had somehow shut. I rushed over and yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My breath hitched, and I could feel sweat trickling down my back. I was trapped. Suddenly, I heard it again, the soft patter of footsteps, closer this time. I turned, my flashlight flickering, and saw shadows moving outside the frosted glass of the door. Small, dark shapes, like the silhouettes of children gathering outside. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the room, though the door remained closed. They were inside. Somehow, they were inside. My flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with the switch, trying to bring it back to life, but it stayed dead. That's when I felt it, a small hand brushing against mine, cold, clammy, impossibly real. I jerked my hand away, backing up until I hit the wall. I heard whispers, so many voices overlapping, filling the room like a swarm of insects, buzzing and scratching in my ears. "We're here. Don't you want to play?" The air grew thick, suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. I shut my eyes, hoping that when I opened them, the room would be empty, that I'd be back in the dull, normal reality of my cleaning routine. When I opened my eyes, the room was filled with children. They stood in a tight circle around me, their faces pale and eyes wide and empty, staring up at me with expressions that seemed both innocent and ancient, as if they held secrets I could never understand. They were all silent, just staring, and I could feel my chest tightening, my throat constricting. Then, one by one, they raised their hands, pointing at the wall behind me. I turned, slowly, terrified of what I might see. The wall I had been standing against was covered in another drawing, one I hadn't noticed before. This one was different. It was a portrait, detailed, far more intricate than the childlike scrawls that surrounded it. It was me. But in this drawing, I was lying on the floor, my eyes closed, my face twisted in an expression of pure terror. Around me, the children were holding hands, forming a circle, their faces twisted into strange, disturbing smiles, and at the bottom, scrawled in thick black letters, were the words, "Welcome to the family." My vision blurred, and I felt the room spinning. I stumbled, reaching out for support, but my hand passed through thin air. The children were gone, the drawings faded, the room was empty again. I staggered out of the room, my legs weak, my mind racing. As I stumbled into the hallway, I saw a single crayon on the floor, its tip worn down to nothing. I picked it up, feeling its weight, the faint smudges of black covering my fingers. I knew I had to leave. I bolted down the hall, my footsteps echoing behind me. Just as I reached the door, I heard one last whisper, faint and cold, echoing from room 17. "See you tomorrow, Sarah." I never went back to St. Augustus Children's Hospital. I quit the next day, ignoring the questions from my manager and the missed calls from HR. I didn't care. I couldn't go back. But sometimes late at night, I still hear that laughter. It echoes in my mind, faint and chilling, bringing back memories of tiny footsteps, hollow eyes, and those words scrawled in crayon. "Welcome to the family." The graveyard shift at Redmere Station wasn't exactly a popular gig, but it paid the bills. I'd been working there for a few months, and in that time, I'd gotten used to the quiet echo of my own footsteps and the unsettling stillness that settled in around 1 a.m., when the final train for the night would rumble through and then disappear down the tunnel. It was a Thursday when it happened, or maybe a Friday, I'm not sure. The days blur together in a place like Redmere. It was around 1:10 a.m., and I was just starting to relax, thinking I could shut down soon, when I noticed a man standing alone on the platform. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, something straight out of a black and white photograph. Dark wool, a vest, and one of those narrow-brimmed hats that I hadn't seen anyone wear in decades. I watched him from the small security room adjacent to the platform. He was standing very still, staring at the tracks as if he were waiting for something, although no train was scheduled. I assumed he'd just missed the last one and was waiting for me to tell him we were closing. I'd seen weirder things. But then, right on cue, the final train appeared, its headlights slicing through the shadows of the tunnel. I frowned. The last train had already passed, and the next wouldn't arrive until morning. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was just tired, but the train was real. I could hear the clack of its wheels, the hiss of the brakes. The doors slid open with a heavy sigh. The man didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the train without a backward glance. Then, before I could even react, the doors closed and the train pulled away, disappearing into the black. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I reached for the radio to contact the night supervisor, but paused. What would I say? I decided to review the security footage instead. Pulling it up, I watched the silent, grainy footage as the man arrived, waited, and boarded the impossible train. But something was off. I replayed the video twice, squinting at the screen. In the footage, the man didn't appear to be waiting on the platform. He was standing right behind me, in the security room, his head tilted to one side, watching me with dark, unblinking eyes. I whipped around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Only the faint sound of the train whistle echoed in the silence, a sound that should have vanished the moment the train disappeared. I was frozen, staring into the empty room. I felt like someone had just walked over my grave. Swallowing hard, I looked back at the monitor. The footage was the same. He was still standing behind me in the video, as if he were waiting for something. I flicked through the camera feeds, half expecting him to show up in another room, lurking in a corner. But the platform was empty, the office was empty, everything was empty. Shaken, I decided to leave. I figured I could log it in the morning, make it sound like a weird technical glitch, and brush it off. I didn't sign up to be a ghost hunter. I just wanted a quiet paycheck. But as I turned to go, the lights flickered, and the air grew cold, enough to make me shiver. And then, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing off the walls of the empty station. I froze, listening as they drew closer, moving from the far end of the platform toward the security room. My heart thundered in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to look at the monitor, afraid of what I might see. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I could feel a presence on the other side, something heavy, watching, waiting. And then the doorknob twisted. I backed away, feeling for something, anything, to defend myself with. But the door didn't open. Instead, there was a soft, chilling knock. 3 taps. Slow, precise. I opened my mouth to say something, but my throat was dry and no words came out. I forced myself to glance at the monitor. He was there again, standing in the office behind me, watching me with those hollow eyes, his head tilted in that unsettling way. "Who are you?" I whispered, barely audible, more to myself than anything. The figure on the monitor leaned forward as if he'd heard me. His lips moved, though no sound came through. I watched, mesmerized, as he mouthed a single word. "Soon." And then the screen went black. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair, scrambling for the door. I didn't care about protocol or logging out. I just wanted to get out of that station. I sprinted down the hallway toward the exit, my footsteps echoing against the tiled walls. But as I reached the stairs, the sound of a train whistle echoed from the tunnel below. I stopped, my blood turning to ice. The tunnel was pitch black, but I could see faint headlights glimmering in the distance, growing brighter. Another train was coming, a train that shouldn't exist. Compelled by something I couldn't explain, I turned back. The train rolled in, slow and deliberate, stopping right in front of me. The doors slid open, revealing a single empty car. I felt a chill as a faint, static-filled whisper floated through the air, like a radio tuned to the wrong station. Against every instinct, I stepped closer, peering into the car. The seats were empty, but something lay on the floor at the far end of the car, barely visible in the dim light. My name tag. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I hadn't lost my name tag. I'd been wearing it just minutes ago. I turned to run, but the platform was empty. The exit swallowed in darkness. I was trapped. A soft voice, almost inaudible, drifted from behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see who or what was speaking. But I didn't have to. The whisper was in my ear, as if someone were standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. "Time to go, Evan." The air grew colder, and I felt a hand, cold, clammy, and all too real, clasp my shoulder. I turned, desperate to break free, but there was no one there. Just the train, waiting, its doors still open like a gaping mouth. And in that moment, I could feel it in my bones. Redmere Station wasn't just haunted, it was a gateway, a liminal place that existed in the crack between our world and something else, something dark and insatiable. The doors hissed shut, and the train began to pull away. I felt a strange tugging sensation, like I was being drawn toward it, pulled by invisible strings. I don't remember much after that, just darkness and that soft, insistent whisper in my ear. The next morning, they found the security room empty, the cameras looping on static. They said I just vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but my name tag and a faint echo of a train whistle that seemed to hang in the air, long after the last train was gone. Late nights in Fairview High were eerie, to say the least. The long, empty hallways always seemed to hum with an invisible energy once the students and staff left. After the crowd from the game finally cleared out, I was left alone with my mop, the distant hum of the vending machines, and the lingering smell of old sneakers and bleach. The hallways were dimly lit by the emergency lights, casting shadows that seemed to stretch and warp as I moved through them. I tried not to let the silence get to me. I'd been working here long enough to know that there was nothing lurking in the shadows. At least, that's what I told myself as I pushed my cleaning cart past the rows of lockers. As I reached the mirror near the gym doors, I caught a glimpse of my reflection. My hair was pulled back tight, my face drawn and tired after a long shift. But then I froze. In the mirror, my reflection was smiling. I wasn't smiling. I was frowning, tired and ready to go home. But my reflection was grinning back at me, eyes gleaming, the expression disturbingly wide and out of place on my weary face. I took a shaky step back, clutching the mop handle for support. My reflection did the same, but kept that sinister smile. It felt like a cruel joke, some trick my mind was playing on me after one too many hours alone in these halls. I rubbed my eyes, but when I looked back, my reflection had returned to normal. My own face, pale and worn out, staring back with the same exhaustion I felt. "Get a grip, Mia," I whispered, forcing myself to turn away. I resumed mopping, trying to shake the image of that grin, but a prickle of unease lingered. I'd never seen anything like that before. I told myself it was just exhaustion, maybe a weird trick of the light. After all, people saw strange things when they were alone at night. I kept moving, determined to finish and get out as quickly as possible, but then it happened again. As I passed another reflective surface, the polished glass of the trophy case near the cafeteria, my reflection was grinning again, its mouth twisted into an even wider smile, teeth bared in a grotesque, gleeful expression. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned sharply to face the case, and once again my face was back to normal, my own weary eyes staring back. I could feel the hairs on my arms rising, a tingling that spread up my spine and wrapped around my chest like a cold hand. I was starting to feel dizzy, like the walls were closing in around me. Maybe I was coming down with something, or maybe I'd inhaled too many cleaning fumes. I needed to finish up and leave. I kept my head down as I moved through the halls, but every time I caught the faintest glimpse of my reflection, in a locker window, a classroom door, the polished floor, it was always the same. That horrible, toothy grin. And each time it seemed more malicious, more alive, as if it were getting closer to the surface, waiting for something. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I ducked into a restroom, turned on all the lights, and stared hard at myself in the mirror above the sink. My face looked back, tired and drained, and I let out a shaky breath of relief. "See? Nothing's there. You're just exhausted," I whispered, bracing myself on the sink. But as I turned to leave, my reflection stayed put. I froze, my hand on the door handle, as the realization sank in. My reflection hadn't moved. I could see myself in the mirror, still gripping the sink, my eyes fixed on me with that same menacing smile. My mouth went dry. Slowly I turned back to the mirror, but the reflection didn't move. It just stood there, grinning, its head tilting to one side as if amused. Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The reflection mouthed something back at me, its lips moving in exaggerated slowness. I couldn't hear a sound, but I didn't need to. The words were unmistakable. "I'm coming." A jolt of terror shot through me, and I stumbled back, my eyes locked on the mirror. My reflection grinned wider, impossibly wide, its mouth stretching beyond the limits of my own, revealing too many teeth, sharp and gleaming. The lights above me flickered, casting the room in a strobe of light and shadow. And then in one blinding flash, the reflection lunged forward. I staggered back, hitting the wall, my head spinning. When I opened my eyes, the mirror was empty. My reflection was gone. A numb, icy panic filled me. I touched my face, almost expecting to find it different, twisted, somehow wrong. But I felt normal, and the mirror in front of me was empty, showing only the restroom behind me. I bolted out of the bathroom, my mind racing. I needed to get out. My footsteps echoed down the hallway as I hurried toward the exit, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. The air around me felt thick, suffocating, as if the darkness itself were pressing in closer. As I rounded the last corner, I saw something that stopped me cold. At the far end of the hallway, standing just outside the exit doors, was me. The figure wore my uniform, had my hair, my face, but it was grinning, that same horrible, wide grin that seemed to stretch farther than any human mouth should. Its eyes glinted with a dark, unnatural light. And it was beckoning. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I watched, paralyzed, as my doppelganger began to walk toward me, each step slow and deliberate, its grin widening with every inch it closed between us. "I'm coming?" it mouthed again, but this time I could hear it, a voice like mine, but hollow, empty, as though spoken from somewhere deep and dark. I stumbled backward, finally breaking free from the terror that had held me in place. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing wildly through the hall. But I could hear another set of footsteps behind me, faster, gaining on me with every step. I burst into the janitor's closet, slamming the door shut behind me and wedging a mop against the handle. I pressed myself into the far corner, clutching my knees, trying to control my breathing, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. Outside, I could hear it. My voice, muffled but unmistakable, whispering through the door. "I'm coming, Mia. Let me in." I pressed my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, willing it all to disappear. The footsteps grew louder until they stopped just outside the door. I felt a shadow move through the thin crack at the bottom of the door, an unnatural darkness spreading like ink. Then, silence. I opened my eyes, daring to believe it might be over, but when I looked down, I saw the shadow shifting, stretching, sliding up the wall. I backed away, heart pounding, until I felt something cold and solid against my back. Slowly I turned around. The mirror I kept in the closet for quick touch-ups before heading home stared back at me. And there I was, grinning. The reflection lifted a hand, waving slowly, mockingly, as it mouthed one last thing. "Switch." Before I could scream, I felt a sudden pull, like 1,000 icy fingers tugging at my skin, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at myself from the other side of the mirror. I could see myself, no, her, smiling back at me, watching as I banged on the glass, my screams silent and unheard. And now, every night, I stand in that mirror, watching her live my life, cleaning the hallways, laughing with my friends, and every so often she glances at her reflection, giving me that twisted, knowing grin. Waiting for the day she lets me out.